Welcome everyone to our webinar on compliance best practices and risk for RIAs and broker-dealers. Before we get started, I do want to go over some housekeeping items. You can maximize or minimize the webinar pane during the presentation by using the red and orange arrow buttons. During the webinar, we also encourage you to ask questions. In the webinar pane, you'll see there's a questions box where you can use that to type in your questions and click submit. Our presenters are going to be leaving a few minutes at the end of the presentation to review those questions. Also, I want to make sure you guys can hear us correctly, so I want to ensure good audio quality. Check your settings to ensure the appropriate audio option is selected. So if you're using a telephone, make sure you click on phone call, and then if you're using your computer, click computer audio. So now I do want to welcome you, and I'm going to pass you off to Bob Duval.
Thank you, Marie. First off, everybody, I'd like to say thank you for participating in this important and timely webinar today. A little bit about myself. I worked at Deloitte for almost a little over 9 years, and I was in industry for a little over 10 years. And then I've been at Armanino for a little over 12 years now, working mostly with financial services companies and then technology and real estate related entities that are engaged in either lending or some complex form of debt and equity type transactions. And throughout my career and over the last several years especially, many of my clients have asked me about risk and compliance issues that I either didn't have answers to or couldn't, for independence reasons, answer the questions. And I'm very happy to introduce Mitch and Portia and Tom because they can absolutely answer compliance related questions for you. And with that being said, I'm going to turn it over to Mitch to introduce himself and his team. And let's all try and participate, ask questions, and we'll get answers to you. Thank you. Mitch?
Great. Thanks so much. This is Mitch Avnet. I am the managing partner and CEO of Compliance Risk Concepts. We are a professional compliance services firm located in New York City. Just by way of background, I have over 25 years of relevant industry experience as a compliance officer. My first 20 were all in-house as a compliance officer, and 13 of those years as a chief compliance officer. And I've worked in many buy-side and sell-side organizations throughout my career. About 5.5 years ago, I launched Compliance Risk Concepts, which is really designed to be an outsourced or co-sourced compliance shop focused on helping firms like yours in executing against their compliance risk on an ongoing day-to-day or on a bespoke or discrete basis. So I'm looking very forward to having this conversation today. I am actually joined by my colleague here in New York, Portia Amato. And Portia will be engaging in a dialogue with me today throughout this session. Portia, maybe you want to give a little bit of background on yourself.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to join us. I've been with CRC for the last couple of years, working with Mitch and the team on execution services and sales as well, and client relationship management. I've been in-house for approximately 20 years at various registered investment advisors, have gone through several SEC exams and other types of internal audits, and my focus throughout my career has been on code of ethics related material, and basically I'm happy to be here and join Mitch on this call, and hopefully we can answer some of your questions.
Great. And we're also joined by Tom Stevie, and Tom is speaking to us, I believe, live from our Irvine office. And Tom recently joined CRC a few months ago and is our risk solutions partner. And I'll allow Tom to give a little bit of background on himself. But before he does, I'd just like to say that Tom's business is a newer vertical for CRC, and he'll talk to you about that. But Tom has been instantly accretive to our business and has been an excellent partner to us in terms of his drive, his motivation, and his ability to source engagements and talent for those engagements. So Tom, with that said, I'll allow you to do a brief intro.
So I have been involved in the regulatory risk and compliance fields going back almost 40 years. I actually started my career in commercial banking with a large money center bank in Chicago, and I transitioned over to providing project staffing services for the banking, regulatory, and risk fields, including investment firms, RIAs, and also hedge fund organizations about 4 years ago. And we have been very successful in terms of building a solutions-based project and contract staffing approach within these areas, and also many of the pertinent areas that obviously keep folks awake at night. So certainly looking forward to talking a little more later on, and certainly appreciate having the opportunity to be here and a part of this this webinar. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Tom. So, just by way of background in terms of company overview, CRC is comprised of approximately 30 former in-house compliance officers. Most of us were chief compliance officers in our prior life, and the balance of the team are former MD level senior compliance officers. Average tenure of our team is anywhere from 15 to 35 years in the seat experience within the industry, which we believe is a distinguishing factor in terms of our overall model. As a buyer of services throughout my career, I always felt as if I would come up on the short end of the stick in terms of any of my engagements, especially when we would engage with a Big Four type firm, where a senior partner would be very impressive, and that person would be quickly replaced by a 2 to 3 year associate who never spent a day inside a broker-dealer or investment advisor or a bank for that matter. So our model is really predicated upon a service level and an expertise that we believe is second to none. We have clients all throughout the United States. We also do business in Canada and the UK. At the end of the day, we believe that through our expertise and our industry connections, and by the way, several of us have also been former regulators. We have several folks who have worked at FINRA and the SEC previously, and what we think is also a distinguishing factor is based on our industry and regulatory experience, we, I believe, balance the commercial versus regulatory very well for our clients and give thoughtful and pragmatic guidance and advice that allows our clients to focus on their revenue generating opportunities while remaining in compliance with regulations. Next slide, please. So from again, just to reiterate, from a service model and a strategic vision standpoint, our goal is to work with firms who need compliance support and help. We focus primarily on emerging players to middle market types of organizations. And these are the organizations who either have little to no in-house compliance support, or they're struggling with internal bandwidth issues. And that could be for any number of reasons. They can be down a person who's out on maternity leave, or they're going through a long and arduous regulatory examination. Whatever the reason may be, we're a good resource to backfill when those lack of resources exist internally. Next.
Perfect, and we're gonna go into our polling question because we wanna get a feel for the audience. So the question is, what keeps you up at night? Is it outdated policies and procedures, or not being prepared for FI, NRA, SEC exams? Is your cybersecurity program not strong enough? U4 disclosures, OBAs, or is it completing all required regulatory filings? So go ahead and let us know. We'll give you a few moments really to answer that question. And that way Mitch can definitely tailor his conversation to that. Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and close the polls now. Let's see. Okay, so it looks about 50% of the audience is not prepared or not being prepared for FI, NRA, and SEC exams.
That's a FINRA exam. FINRA. Actually, can we go back to that slide? So can we see the results again?
Great.
Yeah, we want to spend a little bit of time discussing these responses because obviously these are things that are of high priority or concern to you guys, and so we want to talk a little bit about the experience and how, you know, at some point down the road we could potentially help you, but mostly give you a feel for what transpires during these types of events in terms of an SEC or a FINRA exam, or how to kind of get a feel for what's lacking in your policies and procedures. Regulatory filings are also obviously a big deal. There are some other topics that we might touch upon if we have some time, but Mitch, do you want to start with talking about how firms could and should be preparing for FINRA and SEC exams?
Sure. So, you know, given the polling questions, I'm not surprised with the overwhelming response regarding being prepared for a FINRA and/or an SEC exam. I am a little surprised that people aren't concerned about their cybersecurity programs, and so we could talk about that, you know, afterwards. But and the long and the short of it is, you should be concerned about a FINRA or SEC exam. At the end of the day, I think it's really important and incumbent for firms to have or to evidence or demonstrate that they have a strong compliance culture, and that they have, whether you're a broker-dealer and it's your written supervisory procedures, or you're an investment advisor and it's your policies and procedures and your code of ethics, you really have to make sure, first and foremost, that those documents are living and breathing documents in your organization. And from my perspective, where I see firms get into trouble during the examination process is their business practices don't reconcile to their policies and procedures. And that's a field day for any regulator. So first and foremost, I think it's really important to ensure that your policies and procedures are current and up to date. Now, we have the benefit of going into many different clients and seeing the state of their policies and procedures all throughout the year. And one of the patterns or practices we see, and this may be helpful to those on the phone here, is we see a lot of clients who buy off-the-shelf policies and procedures. And so whether it's the Walters Score product or some other vendor product, they get the 500-600 page manual. And the biggest mistake they make is they don't then tailor that manual to really fit their business. So they're left with this 500-600 page manual that might cover 80 or 90% of things that are irrelevant to that firm. Now, if those are in your policies and procedures and a regulator comes in and sees them in your policies and procedures, they're going to want to see what you're doing around all those areas. So, and it's, again, you can say, well, that's irrelevant to us. And then they can say, well, your policies and procedures say you do this. So there's a disconnect that you have to explain. And that will most likely lead to some written exam finding as to the state of your supervisory program. So I think it's really important, you know, whether you're expecting a regulator to come in, you have to really go through the practice of updating, revising, amending your policies and procedures on an annual basis. And the way I equate it, it's like painting a bridge. Once you paint one side, you're going to always have to go back and paint the other side. We live and breathe in a dynamic environment. Our policies and procedures are also dynamic and should be treated as such. The other important piece is to show that you're testing against those policies and procedures. So whether you're a broker-dealer and you have your annual 3120 process for your CEO certification or your investment advisor, and you have your 2064 process, or you decide to embark on a mock SEC exam, you need to make sure that you're doing that work and you're taking credit for that work and you're demonstrating what you did. Again, can't tell you how many times we've gone into shops and the annual reviews are basically a rubber stamp, a check the box type of review. There's really no substance behind them. And the longer we've been in business, the more and more we're seeing firms like you on the phone outsource those reviews to third parties like us. And I can tell you from a regulatory perspective, regulators like when there's an independent third party involved in doing the annual reviews. To me, as a former CCO, it was always, I think, an apparent or an inherent conflict of interest that I was doing my own 3120 on the program that I built and support throughout the year. There should be a system of checks and balances in place to ensure that there's somebody testing your program who's not involved or embedded in the day-to-day or ongoing execution of that program. So that's something that you also should be very mindful of. And the other thing is, I get involved personally in managing a lot of regulatory exams on behalf and or with clients. And at the end of the day, you have to be honest upfront and just matter of fact in terms of the state of your program. Regulators see all kinds, all types, all sizes, and over the last several years, the quality of regulators has gotten stronger. So FINRA and the SEC have hired from the industry, and they understand our businesses better than I think they have in the past. Having said that, I always want to be candid and direct, and to the extent that they can help in improving our program, that's what they're there for. Now, to the extent that you have a glaring hole or a risk that's not accounted for, that's something that you need to, understand and address and mitigate throughout the year. And the bottom line is, you have to have a reasonable approach and a reasonable compliance program in place. There's no, perfection is not an option with compliance. So it'll never be perfect, and there will always be many iterations to your compliance program. But at the end of the day, if you show that you have a reasonable process in place and you can evidence execution versus those processes, you're going to be in a much better place than those who aren't. The other thing I wanted to talk about is completing all required regulatory filings. So, 33% of you spoke to that as a concern. And naturally, it is a concern. And so in the broker-dealer world, we struggle with a lot of ongoing filing requirements, and whether it's, filing, Form U5s on a timely basis, filing your complaint statistics, anything and everything that you are required to do through the FINRA gateway, you have to have somebody who's minding the store at all times, ensuring that anything that requires a response to FINRA and or the SEC is handled on a timely basis. And so, again, this is not intended to be a sales pitch, but we do have a lot of clients who just don't have the bandwidth to do all this type of stuff internally, and they wind up outsourcing maintenance of CRD and IARD, us as an organization, and to other consulting firms, because they much rather somebody who's focused on this as 100% of their job versus somebody who's going to get to it when they get to it, because it's just one of 80 other things that they have to do as part of their day-to-day. Sure.
So one of the ways that we advise keeping up with your regulatory filings is to maintain a compliance calendar. So, Mitch, do you want to talk a little bit about what that looks like?
Sure. So it's very straightforward, and most of our clients who come to us really want that roadmap as to what they need to do throughout the year. And for those of you on the phone who may be compliance officers or CCOs, that's part of your job, and you know that. But we also advise and support clients who are portfolio managers who also wear the hat of the CCO in their organization. And so they're not so in tune with the day-to-day and ongoing requirements. And one of the things that we do at the onset of any engagement is we will review a client's policies and procedures, and to the extent that they have a compliance calendar, we will reconcile that compliance calendar to their policies and procedures to make sure there's complete alignment between the two documents. Those who don't have a compliance calendar, we will create that from scratch with the client, and that will discuss everything that occurs day to day, week to week, month to month, quarter to quarter, and on an annual basis for certain things that only occur once a year. And what a lot of our clients do is they'll assign roles and responsibilities, whether they're assigning tasks internally or externally to others, and we will help maintain that in conjunction with the client and make sure that it gets executed according to plan. What a lot of our clients do is then tie that into their Outlook calendars, and anything that they're required to do throughout the year is updated in their Outlook calendar in direct correlation to the calendar that we create for their program, and so they know on an ongoing basis what they need to do, what they need to document, how they need to evidence it, et cetera. And that's really truly helpful. Unfortunately, and I would love to hear your thoughts on this, but when we do our annual testing, it's so much easier to look at the client's calendar and really understand who, what, when, where, why, and how often, and test versus starting with nothing.
Right, so absolutely. So a lot of firms do different things and which require different filings. So one of the things that we really want to do is make sure that all of the activities that you perform are tied back to a filing and that you're not missing any and that you're meeting all your deadlines. But more importantly, they'll also help you along, like for instance, and I'm sure for the investment advisors on the line, they'll remember ADV this past year. With all the changes, we made sure that our clients started looking at their ADV well before they normally would because it was quite a bear this year. And, you know, these are the types of things that you also need to keep up with. Normally, if you do filings and it's straightforward format, you can get through it and it's a matter of an update. But what you need to be looking out for are there changes to requirements? Are there changes to how you're going to be answering some of these questions on these filings? So we need everyone to be cognizant of that when they're preparing these filings, that it may not just be, let me do it 2 weeks before the filing is due because I just have to update AUM and number of employees. So that's one of the things that we really keep on top of with our clients and in properly managing the time that they need to get these filings done and what those dates are for the deadline.
And the only other thing I wanted to mention with respect to the survey results was the 0% response to cybersecurity program. And I find that interesting because both the SEC and FINRA are very focused on organizational cybersecurity and what firms are doing to ensure that they have the appropriate controls in place, and whether they are having actual testing done, whether they're doing pen testing or not, what their policy and procedures are specific to cyber, whether or not they have a cyber rider to their E&O insurance, playbooks. Again, a lot of this ties into a business continuity program, but again, maybe that was just something where the FINRA and SEC exams and required filings got a lot more attention this time. But having said that, I do see a risk in the industry. We do get a lot of calls from clients who say they need to, want to, have to put a cyber program in place and evidence that program. And I think there's a lot of good solutions out there that can help organizations. Where I'm seeing the disconnect is needing to do something, and then spending the required, money on actually implementing and treating it more as a nice to have rather than a need to have. So if you're concerned about your regulatory exams, you should be concerned about your cybersecurity program. So
in terms of that, segue is the hot topics that regulators are looking at. So those change periodically.
Sure.
Do you want to talk about how, we need to keep up with the regulatory hot topics so that you know what you need to be looking at from your compliance program for if and when you should have an auditor come into your office?
Yeah, so, everyone on this phone hopefully is aware that annually the SEC and FINRA publish their annual exam priorities and areas of interest. And that's all out there in the public purview. And again, it's a nice roadmap as to where regulators tend to focus. Now, there are certain things that are always going to be on that list. Anti-money laundering, KYC, is always going to be an area of focus for regulators. Sales practices, suitability, especially treatment of elderly people. That's always going to be something that regulators are going to focus on. Fees. Given everything that's transpired over the last couple of years, specific to the fiduciary rule, and how firms were going to structure themselves with, and again, that's a whole 8 webinars in and of itself in terms of how that whole thing has transpired and went down and gone down. But having said that, it actually was good because it forced firms to look at how they structure their business. And over the last several years, everybody in this industry has seen a migration to an AUM model from a commission model. Again, it's not perfect, and if you're from a transactional commission broker-dealer business, it's very hard to transition to an AUM model. But recently the SEC even said, well, you know what? We thought we liked the AUM model, but we also think that there's a place for a pay-as-you-go model, like a commission model. So I think in this day and age, it's great for clients to have access to what fits for them. Some clients who are not going to be, I should restate it, clients who are not going to be actively managed on a discretionary basis shouldn't necessarily be in an advisory account. Paying fees for an account in an account that's not actively managed leads to issues related to reverse churning and your assets being stagnant and not at work. So again, with every new idea comes new issues, but I think it's important to look at all the hot regulatory issues and exam priorities every year. We always do, and we try to communicate with our clients on an ongoing basis about regulatory change. We recently created a regulatory research role here at CRC, and so part of our team, all they do is scour all the regulatory sites for new or amended rules or proposals, and we do an impact analysis for our clients as to how these rules or changes to these rules may impact their business. And so one of the struggles we know compliance officers have, or firms have in general, is keeping pace with the pace of regulatory change. And so it's nice to have resources available to you that can scour through all that noise and really come back to you with what's relevant in terms of what you need to be focused on based on your risk profile, based on the businesses that you do. And so we're finding that to be very well received by our clients. We actually have a client-facing compliance bulletin that we send out every month where we talk about pertinent regulatory and industry issues. And it's something that it's good to have in your arsenal just to make sure you're aware of what's going on, and to the extent that you need to address a particular business line in your firm or address your policies and procedures to make sure that they're current based on regulatory requirements, always good to have access to as many of those resources as you can get.
So the other poll question here has you guys being a little concerned about outdated policies and procedures. One of the things that I've done in my years in-house is the best way that I have found to identify those weaknesses or the outdated policies is to do a risk assessment of throughout the firm. So basically, what are the activities that the firm is performing, and what are the risks to the client, to essentially anything that's going to be looked at as what's the word I'm looking for here, as basically a conflict of interest. So can we talk about risk assessments and how firms should actually perform those regularly?
So, risk assessments is one of my favorite topics, and if you were in the room, you could see I'm being sarcastic. Again, it's a necessary evil in the world that we live in to really have to do a quality assessment of your business, your culture, compliance, and the risks that are inherent in each of your business lines. Now, for limited purpose broker-dealers and small investment advisors, it's not that huge of an undertaking. But when you start getting into complex integrated financial services firms that have multiple business lines, multiple legal entities, broker-dealers, investment advisors, funds, banks, etc., it becomes a very cumbersome exercise to look at an organization holistically in terms of its risk and really try to decision what elevates itself or gets escalated as an enterprise risk to that organization. Now, in our business, we focus on the compliance side of operational risk, and compliance risk is an operational risk. And we really like to go across each of our clients' discrete business lines and really try to assess their understanding of their own business and the risks that may be present given the areas that they're focused on as an organization. And so, I've worked in large investment banks and commercial banks, and trying to do a risk assessment from a top-down approach only is a very hard thing to do, and I think in a lot of instances has minimal to no value because you're trying to create one-size-fits-all approach to understanding risk across your organization. It really has to be more than a top-down approach. It's got to be top-down and bottom-up, okay? And so the way that I've always approached risk assessment is I really like to understand the risk of a particular business line and create an assessment based on that business. So if you're doing an assessment of a broker-dealer, and again, I'm not trying to oversimplify, that broker-dealer can have one business line or 25 business lines. So that risk assessment will look different. But then you go from broker-dealer to investment advisor to commercial banking entity to auto leasing section of the firm. And then you start to look for like types of conflicts and risks that are embedded in each of those business lines. And that, to me, really helps inform really what elevates to something you want to look at and consider on an enterprise level. And again, this is very important, especially for those compliance officers who are reporting into boards or operating committees, to really have a crisp understanding of each of those discrete risks at the business level and what truly gets escalated at the most senior levels of the organization that presents the realest type of risk that can impact your business immediately. I'm not a big fan of the red, yellow, and green stoplights, and I think there's a risk in that too because it's very subjective, and that's okay. But you can only go back to your board and tell them your risk is high and increasing so many quarters in a row. That just doesn't make sense. At some point, your organization needs to decide where it wants to live in its risk spectrum. And it's okay sometimes to operate at the highest levels of risk, as long as you have the appropriate controls and mitigation in place to justify that risk. We are in risk businesses, and so I have no problem with organizations making good business risk decisions that are supported by good risk mitigation and controls, and they can justify that. Where companies get in trouble is when they do one-offs. And by one-offs, I mean is they'll enter into a particular business or transaction that they have no previous experience in, have no controls, have no operations to support. That's an accident waiting to happen. So my whole approach is you've got to be careful, thoughtful, and pragmatic in terms of how you think about assessing your business opportunities, and more importantly, behind the scenes, really in how you assess the risk of the business that you've decided to engage in. So that's something I think about frequently, and our clients think about that frequently, but there has to be a thoughtful process to doing it. Just having a ginormous spreadsheet listing everything that you can think about. You know, while it might look impressive, it doesn't necessarily save the day. Okay, great. I think we can come off of the polling slide.
Yep, and we'll give you an opportunity to ask us some questions in a few minutes, actually.
So one of the things we talk about in our world is what we view as the compliance problem. And I've always been a technology-forward compliance officer, and CRC as a company tries to be technology-forward. And that doesn't mean I want to sell technology. I don't. We're agnostic to who we work with as a technology provider to our clients. And you know, we have our favorites, but we will work with whomever our client ultimately engages to help support their compliance programs. Having said that, and this is not a small firm problem necessarily, we see this problem in large clients as well. Clients are relying on antiquated processes and technology, and I'll talk about what I mean by that in a second. But we find that in this day and age, while it may be surprising to some, that most organizations have compliance officers who are just playing the role of hunter and gatherer in their organizations. And what I mean by that is they have to really dig deep and across many bifurcated and disparate platforms and systems to really gather the information they need to do their job. And I believe that 80 to 90% of a compliance officer's job at times can be is just trying to gather information with very little time left to actually do the high quality analysis that we're paid to do. And to me, the role of a strong compliance officer is to really understand the data and provide good risk-based guidance to your clients, your business, you know, each of your businesses in terms of what they should be thinking about in terms of their programs. Having said that, we see a huge opportunity to improve that. And so what we have found over the years is that there is a lot of great technology available to the smaller and mid-sized clients that they may have been historically priced out of. And so we encourage our clients to continuously look for systems to help them in the execution of their compliance program. And I'm not, you know, whether it's switching to a better email review and retention platform, automating your personal, your employees' personal brokerage statements and their disclosures through a platform rather than doing it manually. These are not high cost or high ticket items, but they do help improve the life of the compliance officer and the firm on a day-to-day basis. How much easier would it be if you had a portal where all your employees can go and see all the forms and certifications that they have to complete throughout the year, and they can get all their pre-trade review approvals done through that platform, and you can conduct your reviews after the fact through, you know, automated feeds rather than opening up paper statements. And in this day and age, we still have clients that are relying on paper statements and not small organizations. So there's a lot of opportunity there. And I think the more that we can encourage our industry and our clients, meaning our business owners, to invest in compliance programs, which include technology, I think the better off and better served our clients are going to be in terms of their compliance experience. And at the end of the day, unless you have strong operational support for your revenue generating employees, that's a risk in and of itself. And so, you know, the way I always look at this is it's a pay me now or pay me later type of scenario. So it's important to build strong business cases to make these types of investments. And like I said, I think there's a real opportunity out there, especially with a lot of the newer or emerging technologies. There's a lot of stuff now being done in blockchain for compliance, where I think there's going to be significant improvements in the quality of reporting from a surveillance perspective. So I think more to come on that front. Next slide, please. So yeah, we already talked about this. Basically, I touched on this in the first part of the session. We start any engagement holistically by looking at an organization's policies and procedures. And again, we structure our support around that and really can serve on a fully outsourced basis or ad hoc discrete projects. Next, please.
So at this point, actually, we can speak to this slide, and then afterwards, we've basically listed out all our support opportunities or support items, or most of them we've tried to capture. We don't need to go through all those, but maybe we could just talk on a high level.
And we're going to provide everybody
the deck, correct? Absolutely. Cool. Because we are running out of time. We want to give Tom 5 minutes, and we also want to open up for some questions. So I'm sure you'll have some.
Great. So, maybe at this point, you want to turn it over to Tom?
That would be great. So can we pull up Tom's vertical? And Tom, sorry that we've kind of cut into a lot of our time, so maybe you could spend just a couple of minutes speaking about your practice and your offering and what you can do for these fine folks on the phone. Tom, are you there?
Okay, I'm here. Can everybody hear me?
We can.
Okay, so thank you very much. One of the things that we have found over the years is that growth in an organization can oftentimes cause pain. And along with growth, as it relates to ensuring proper policies and procedures are in place, ensuring that you have the proper framework to be able to meet SEC and FINRA requirements. It's necessary to be able to have a scalable program in place that is able to accommodate that growth. And oftentimes, there are a lot of organizations that, as Mitch mentioned before, because of the rapid pace of regulatory change, are not able to keep up with that tweaking of their infrastructure, so to speak. And so this is where we come into play. Over the years, we have worked very successfully to build a team of highly seasoned subject matter experts in all areas of AML, BSA, KYC compliance, who are very, very much up to date on a lot of the pertinent regulatory changes, such as compliance due diligence and enhanced due diligence, and have the ability to be able to come in and fill that void, if you will, on a project or contract basis to ensure that through perhaps an initial risk assessment, for example, and then either new creation or modifications of existing policies and procedures. And then, of course, working with these organizations in a collaborative manner to ensure that they are properly up to speed with these changes that need to be made. So this is really the void that we fill with a lot of these organizations. And typically, the type of expertise that we offer would be professionals that in many cases are CAMS certified or have their CRCM certification, maintained both on the transactional analysis and review side as well as compliance side, anywhere from 10 to 15 years plus of experience, both on the consulting side as well as performing in these functions in-house. So these are individuals who definitely, have a great breadth and depth of expertise. And this is not only the concentration of what we do, but in addition to that, obviously, we want to make sure that we're totally and completely attuned to current regulatory changes and ensuring that companies can kind of stay ahead of the curve in that area as opposed to having to play catch up. So that is kind of a summary of my practice, or our practice, I should say, in a nutshell. And obviously, in terms of the particular slide that you're looking at, without really going through it in a great deal of detail, it talks a lot about the pertinent transactional functions that have to be looked at all the way from the initial preparation and review of the CIP all the way through back end where there might be potential red flag alerts, suspicious activity, reviews, reports that have to be prepared, and pretty much everything in between. So that pretty much, in a nutshell, kind of provides a summary of our practice. We work both, as Mitch's practice does, both on a national as well as international basis, doing business with entities such as yours in Latin America, as well as in Europe and in Canada. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Tom.
Thanks, Tom. So from a time perspective, do we have any questions? I'd love to answer some questions and really address things people want to talk about.
We'll go ahead and give the audience a few minutes to ask some questions. Just as a reminder, there should be a questions box in your webinar pane, and you can go ahead and type those in.
So yeah, to the extent people are not comfortable with posting a question, our contact information appears at the end of this, at the end of our deck, and will be provided to you. Feel free to reach out to us by phone or by email. The way that we work is we want to establish long-term strategic relationships with our clients. We don't charge for you to give us a call and ask us any relevant question you may have. We like to prove out our value, and that's how we're going to win long term. So we would love to have a relationship with anyone who needed to gain access to our level of expertise, but don't feel as if you can't approach us because we're going to be coming to you with a contract in hand.
Yeah, so as Mitch mentioned, none of us have been salespeople in our previous careers. We're all compliance officers, so you're not going to get the salesperson on the phone.
We'll give it another minute, and then I think we can wrap it, unless there's any other topics anyone wants to discuss.
So it looks like there may be a few people that have virtually raised their hands, and maybe they're going to be more comfortable emailing us directly. I don't see any questions coming through. We'll go ahead and go to the slide where we have all the contact information for our folks. So we have a member from our team. We do have Portia and Mitch's contact information here as well. So if you do feel more comfortable emailing anyone here, you can definitely do that. Call us. And we definitely want to thank everyone for coming. You will receive an email within the next 48 hours with a link to the recording, the slide deck, and that way you have all the information that we went over today.
Great.
Yes, thank you everyone for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Very much appreciated.
Thank you.
Thank you.